Hello. So I've been wanting to make this for a while. It's kind of a bit of a one-stop shop for what the heck is going on with Shatter, freezing, understanding why we play Frost like we play Frost. So we're gonna start off actually not with this, then we'll get to that in a second, just with the actual Shatter passive, which is this. Multiplies the crit strike chance of your spells against frozen targets by 1.5 and adds an additional 50% crit chance. So that's relatively simple, right? We just multiply whatever crit we have by 1.5. So let's say we have 20% crit. Now you have 30% because we multiplied that by 1.5, and then we just add 50% to it, and then it equals, 80%. So when you're shattering a target and you have 20% crit, your spells just have an 80% crit rate, whatever ones are benefiting from that shatter. And what I want to help people understand today, because I see a bit of a misunderstanding a lot of times, is what exactly, when are we shattering, how and what, really. So let's get into that. So shatter equals frozen, right? The target needs to be frozen for you to shatter it. And we have a lot of different ways to freeze mobs. This might be kind of hard for you to read. Sorry, but I'm going to say it all anyway. So frozen is the same for every single freeze, essentially. Like, if you look at an instance of a target being frozen, when a spell hits it, it treats every spell the same. Okay, but how we freeze them is treated actually differently, if that makes sense. So, for instance, if a Ice Lance is frozen by Fingers of Frost, or Winter's Chill, or Ice Nova, it does the same amount of damage for all three of them, but how that works is different. Okay, and I guarantee you've probably never heard in a rotation guide to Ice Nova and then Ice Lance, right? But that is something you can do. Though we'll explain why you don't in a little bit. But yeah, so all three of these things do the exact same thing. They do it in a little bit different way, though. Freezes require the target to be CCable, but they're full AoE, right? So everything that is CCable that gets frozen by the root, you can then shatter during its duration, which for the top 4 freezes is 1 second. So freeze, Ice Nova, Frost Nova, Glacial Spike, those all last 1 second. And freezing, cold, and frostbite, they'll only last 0.5 seconds. And this is their minimum duration. So anytime they're taking, damage in group content, for instance, they're just only gonna last this long, really. At counter that, Winter's Chill is per target. So if I flurry the main target and I cast Ice Lance, well, Ice Lance is a 2-target spell. It's not going to shatter the other Ice Lance. So only my main Ice Lance is going to do increased damage and to get the increased crit chance. The other Ice Lance on the other target is actually going to be unshattered. It's going to hit for like 3k damage, which is not ideal, honestly. But even though it is per target, we have Cone of Cold with Coldest Snap to apply it in AoE. And that's Winter's Chill is our most powerful spell for applying frozen effect because it works for any mage spell, has a 6-second duration. The only downside is it actually needs to hit all the targets, and with Cone of Cold that can be a little finicky. So Fingers of Frost only works on Ice Lance in retail at the moment, but it is per cast. So unlike Winter's Chill, where with Winter's Chill if you flurry in an Ice Lance, your Ice Lance is only shattered against the main target. With Fingers of Frost, if you Ice Lance, it's shattered against both targets. So this kind of helps you understand why we actually generally prio Ice Lance with Fingers of Frost higher than Flurry in AoE, all else held equal, just because Ice Lance actually shatters against both targets with Fingers of Frost rather than with Flurry, it's only one target. Alright, so now we've kind of explained all these things, and they're all the same, right? They all do the same thing, it's just how we use them in the rotation is dependent on their ability to be useful, right? We never use any freezes in Raid, essentially, because they require the target to be CCable, and bosses aren't CCable, so Flurry is our main source of that. But freezes are very, very powerful, and we use them very frequently in Mythic Plus. You can watch my Frost guide if you want to hear more about that, and there's a play script I have to identify freezable mobs. But using these shatters for yourself right now is a massive damage increase. We're talking like 30% if you are able to use them in a situation and don't, right? So let's start off with this. They have a minimum duration, right? 1 second for your active shatters. This normally doesn't play into effect because a casted spell like has its cooldown happen or its GCD happen while you're casting it. So if you were like Glacial Spike into an ability, you can just cue the ability and it goes off at the same time as Glacial Spike because Glacial Spike's cast time is lower than the GCD, right? So their like duration doesn't really matter if I just Glacial Spike into Ice Nova because the Glacial Spike's gonna hit like 0.2 seconds after the Ice Nova happens, and then it's guaranteeing a Shatter, right? So this is essentially the same thing as a Frostbite into Flurry, or sorry, Glacial Spike into Flurry. So that's a bit of the same idea. Nothing matters here because this will always work unless you're too close to the mob. On the other hand, though, even though this has a minimum of 1 second duration, you can get your GCD below 1 second. Okay, so you can cast Ice Nova and then cast another spell before it goes away. All right. So, for instance, this is something we did a lot in Season 1. We would Ice Nova, and then we would go into a Cone of Cold. And this was because of Snowstorm. Snowstorm just made your Cone of Cold do a lot of damage. It's never worth talenting at the moment because of how long the cooldown of Cone of Cold is when you have Cold Snap. But with less than 1 second GCD, you can shatter spells this way. Though Cone of Cold's only one in recent memory. So this was pretty cool. What this equates to is essentially like more than 50% haste, which you would generally have in Icy Veins, right? Because Icy Veins just is a haste steroid. We have so much base haste at the moment. But yeah, if you wanted to, you could also Ice Nova into Ice Lance. However, that's not generally done, partially because Ice Lance has its travel time. So you can't really account for that unless you're standing right inside the mob. And it's also not that powerful. If you were to want to shatter anything with it, Ice Lance would be it aside from Glacial Spike. The issue is that Ice Nova is a powerful Nova. And if you use that and then you're forced to use Frost Nova later on, it's a bit of a waste. Right? We're already so flush with Fingers of Frost and AoE that we don't need to utilize Ice Nova to its fullest potential or anything. However, we have a lot of active effects, right, in AoE. We have Blizzard, and we have Frozen Orb, and so that's where these Novas can really cause you to get a lot more effect than you're thinking. On top of shattering an AoE, it's also going to cause your Frozen Orb and your Blizzard to have a much higher crit rate than normal. So oftentimes you'll find in Mythic Plus your Blizzard and Frozen Orb have like a 50% crit rate or something, and you're sitting here at like 33% crit, and you're like, what the heck? And that's because of the consistent application of Winter's Chill and of your freezes and AoE. So yeah, if you're wondering, Frozen Orb's tick rate not increased by haste, just a static 0.5 seconds. Blizzard's tick rate is increased by haste, so you can get a lot of Blizzard ticks to be shattered in a high haste situation. And I suppose while we're talking about this, Blizzard has its cooldown scale inversely with haste. Its cooldown and its duration scales inversely with haste. So as your haste goes up, right, the cooldown and duration of Blizzard goes down, but the tick rate goes up. Okay, and the reason for this is so it actually keeps the same amount of CDR per cast. And so when you're casting a Blizzard that has a 3-second cooldown versus a Blizzard that has 7-second cooldown, they both give the same amount of cooldown reduction, just in different periods of time, right? Because one of them is 3 seconds long. You can game this a little bit, though, if you gain haste after a Blizzard is active. We live in a world where most of our spells are dynamically update, and that's true for Blizzard as well. So let's say you place down a 7-second Blizzard, right? And then your haste goes up. Well, it's not going to reduce the duration of a Blizzard you already placed down, but it does increase the tick rate. So the 7-second Blizzard all of a sudden is going to get 20% more ticks, which is pretty nice because that means you'll have 2 Blizzards active on your next cast, and you just get more Orb CDR, right? Because Orb CDR is based on Blizzard ticks, so that's a bit interesting. It's worth noting, by the way, that Shatter applies to all mage spells. I think people kind of get confused about what it applies to and what it doesn't apply to. Um, so when I say all mage spells, I mean all mage spells, and that's it. This doesn't work on trinkets, and it never will work on trinkets unless somehow Blizzard changes Shatter when they're implementing a trinket to accidentally add it to it because it's whitelisted. But yeah, it works on all mage spells. So you can shatter Shifting Power, you can shatter Dragon's Breath, you can shatter Arcane Explosion, you can shatter your freezes. So for instance, your Ice Nova also, if you look at it, can have like a 50% crit rate if you're using other spells like Frostbite, right? Because your Ice Nova is actually shattering or getting shattered by some of your other abilities, and also can be shattered by, like your Winter's Chill and stuff. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of like why we use our freezes in that way in AoE, especially. We're looking at Winter's Chill. Sorry, I lost my cursor. We're looking at Winter's Chill. The way these things apply it is interesting. So Flurry, I think if any of you are like watching guides, Flurry has, God, I hate writing with this, 3 projectiles. Okay, so we have 3 projectiles. Flurry is also very fast. Travels at, I think it's 50 yards per second. For instance, I believe Frostbolt is 35 yards per second. So it's 3 projectiles. Each of them apply Winter's Chill. So the reason why you can do like an X into Flurry and then have 2 spells afterwards is because each of the projectiles applies Winter's Chill. So this spell, since it casts so slowly or flies so slowly, like for instance Frostbolt with its 35 yard per second cast or velocity, is just going to land between your flurry cast. So it would be Frostbolt. The flurry is going to hit first, then the Frostbolt, then 2 flurry casts, and then you're going to benefit from all 3 Winter's Chill because you benefit from one of the earlier projectiles Winter's Chill here, and that just got refreshed by the later 2 projectiles. This is also why, since Shatter again benefits all mage spells, if you look at Flurry, you're going to notice it has like an 80% crit rate, and the reason for that is because the projectiles, once again, right, the target already has Winter's Chill on it when the 2 later projectiles hit, so those are just going to have a really high increased chance to shatter. But the fact that this combo is based on spell speed is not ideal because it can cause it to break. One of the problems in beta of Dragonflight, actually that I think continued until it was removed, was Ebonbolt. They randomly changed Ebonbolt's travel time velocity during Dragonflight, and it made it so you were actually unable to shatter it in this combo like you haven't before, unless you were less than 20 yards away from the target. So you were unable to do Ebonbolt Flurry and have that be pre-shattered. It would land after all the flurries hit because it was so freaking slow. So yeah, and this is a problem that isn't exclusive to Ebonbolt. If any of you have played Frost and Volacross and you're standing in like the back half of the ring, you'll notice this as well. Your Frostbolt ends up traveling so slowly that your flurry actually, all 3 hits happen before your Frostbolt reaches there. We have some other issues with range as well, but that doesn't matter. So yeah, good explanation of flurry, I hope. Cone of Cold is interesting. So Cone of Cold, it applies Winter's Chill, and Winter's Chill isn't like a 1-stack debuff, it's a 2-stack debuff, right? So whenever you see Cone of Cold and you Cone of Cold in AoE, you're only getting 1 Winter's Chill, and the reason for that is actually because Blizzard borked their coding. So before they changed Cone of Cold to only work in AoE, it actually gave 2 stacks in Winter's Chill. When they changed it to work in AoE, they also caused it to somehow consume one of its own Winter's Chill stacks that it applies. It doesn't benefit, by the way, from it, by the way, either. So it's just wholly wrecks you. And now you only have 1 Winter's Chill stack after you Cone of Cold, so that's a little unfortunate. It's also why, so normally with your Cold of Cold combo, you do like a Comet Storm into a Cone of Cold, into an Orb, into Comet Storm. It's kind of like what people say. The issue with this, though, is Comet Storm takes a really long time to land. It is like a 1-second delay till it starts hitting the target, essentially. So the first comment hits 1 second afterwards, and it's every like 200 ms after that, right? So let's say your blizzard isn't up here, which normally isn't up here, and you were to go into an ice lance. The issue is you just consumed Winter's Chill on 2 of your targets, and this Comet Storm is now going to shatter a lot less. So it actually sims a little bit better if you put Comet Storm before the orb in all scenarios, just because half the time you end up consuming part of the Winter's Chill when you're doing this. So yeah, but it doesn't really matter either way. So, which is weird, right? Because putting your orb after the Comet Storm often means that you're losing out on orb CDR, but in a sustained situation, it's better to have it before. It's also more burst, which can be nice for Mythic Plus. Fingers of Frost, there's really not much to talk about here, except, just affects Ice Lance on all targets. And I guess we'd start talking about some talent stuff. So we're looking at talents, right? The main 2 of note that really affect your freezing is Wintertide. So Fingers of Frost and Powered Ice Lances deal 20% increased damage to frozen targets. So from looking at my horrible paint graph, we can tell that that means that it either needs to benefit from this or this as well, right? So either one of these will give you an additional 20% increased damage if you still have Fingers of Frost active. This happens a lot of times, actually. This probably happens more often than you think it does. One of the interesting things is actually Glacial Spike. Glacial Spike has travel time, and you're going to shatter your Glacial Spike, right, normally with freezes. So sometimes when you do Glacial Spike into Ice Nova, the Glacial Spike will land at like 0.5 seconds left in the Ice Nova. So for instance, let's say this is like Ice Nova's duration. The Glacial Spike lands here, and then its root lasts for a second, right? But since it's so delayed by the range, you actually have like this brief period where you have a GCD open as well. So a lot of times you're kind of unintentionally benefiting from Wintertide right here in this third GCD, because you're just Ice Lancing after your Ice Nova that you did. So this is actually your first spell hitting, even though it's your second spell cast, and this is your second spell hitting, and then this is your first spell hitting, and this is your third spell. So you can get like a lot of unintended benefit from Wintertide here, and this also happens a lot, or it can happen a lot on dummies, but Ice Lance travels faster than Glacial Spike, so you can't actually Glacial Spike into Ice Lance, because that won't work. Your Ice Lance will hit first. But when you're at a bit of range and doing this combo, it ends up having you Wintertide Shatter, which is interesting. So yeah, and if you look at your Mythic Plus logs, and you look at like the duration and events of Ice Nova, you'll see that it lasts exactly 1 second 90% of the times. Alright, then we have another talent, Sub-Zero. Your frost spells deal 5% more damage to targets that are rooted and frozen. This is an and, right? It's not an or. They need to be rooted and they need to be frozen. I'm going to be honest, I did want to have a druid come Entangling Roots a target while I Ice Lanced it with Flurry active. I didn't do that before this video. That should work. But this is obviously intended for you to use these, your freezes, right? Because these are both a root and a freeze, right? So anything that's affected by this gains that 10% damage amp. It also makes Frostbite really a lot stronger. Frostbite really, its only purpose is for what I talked about earlier, just increasing the overall shatter rate of Blizzard and Frozen Orb to large proportions. However, when you start adding a 10% damage amp into it, and the fact that this is like essentially guaranteed to shatter a Frozen Orb tick and multiple Blizzard ticks, suddenly it's like, oh my god, 30% of my Blizzard and Frozen Orb damage is actually gaining 10% damage. So that's, anyway. So they can be very impactful. That's why essentially every build that runs Frostbite or Sub-Zero, you're also going to see it run Frostbite because of that. And Frostbite, if we want to mention it, this scales with targets, right? So it gives your chills effect a 10% chance to freeze the target for 4 seconds. Frost is nice in the fact that we are not hard capped at all. All of our spells hit all of the targets, regardless of whether or not they deal full damage, because we are soft capped. But when you look at Frozen Orb, right? This has a chill. Enemies damaged by Frozen Orb are slowed by 40%, and it hits all enemies. It just deals reduced damage past 8 targets. But for Frostbite, we don't care about the reduced damage. It just needs to hit and slow a mob to have a chance for it to freeze. Okay, and we are just sending out frozen orbs at high target counts, right? Think of every time you're at 8 targets and you're just like blizzarding and frozen orbing. All of that is just going to keep building onto your chance to have Frostbite. It does have an ICD, of course, but it's relatively low. Can't recall what it is. If you hover over the tooltip on Wowhead, it'll tell you. But yeah, so once we get to higher target counts, you start seeing like a really, really high uptime on Frostbite on a lot of enemies. Because if you ever think about it, like everything applies a chill. Blizzard, chill. Frozen Orb, chill. Kind of Cold applies a chill as well. So it's really quite effective. I like this talent a lot, but it's got some downsides, so you don't always take it. Freezing Cold also is a bit of an interesting talent because this causes enemies, when they're hit by kind of cold, to be frozen and rooted, right? But most times in AoE, or always in AoE essentially, we're taking this talent where kind of cold already applies Winter's Chill. So there's no need for them to be rooted if they have Winter's Chill, right? Because it's exactly the same thing. It has the only niche benefit of being a minor DPS increase when you have Sub-Zero active. Otherwise, you generally go Ice Ward. If you have Sub-Zero active, then you do benefit from the targets being rooted and frozen at the same time, right? So in this case, it's great for your Cone of Cold combo to give you a bit of extra damage on Cone of Cold when you have Sub-Zero talented. Otherwise, it's not useful at all, especially because it actually has this lower minimum duration of 0.5 seconds as opposed to 1 second that the other active freezes bring you. So, yeah. All right. I hope that has been helpful, illuminating for some people. It was a bit ranty. There wasn't too interesting visuals, so I'm interested to hear your feedback regarding this. But yeah, it would be fun to do some more things like this. But I think what I'm probably gonna try and trend to is my next video, if it's not a Mythic Plus video, is likely going to be some sort of like common mistakes video, because I haven't made one of those since Shadowlands, and I think it's about time for another one. So have a good rest of your day.